In the previous lesson, we had a look at how mean, mode and median were calculated, and what we're going to do in this particular lesson is to have a look at how to interpret them, how to use them. Now, the first thing to remember is that mean, mode and median, they're the key words that we've covered, or key concepts. Mean, mode and median, they're measures of central tendency. Now, if you can look at the word central tendency, it means the middleness of the scores. Mean is the average, which you would imagine is about the middle. Mode is the most frequent score, round about the middle we would expect. And median is the middle score if we line all the scores up in order. And each of these are single numbers, and they are basically each one of them telling us a little bit differently, I guess, about the middleness of the scores. So the question is, which one is most appropriate? Which one should we use? Mean, mode, median, all of them? Well, as they say here, there's no general rule that can be used, but it depends on the type of the data. So there is one thing, however, they mention that categorical data usually uses the mode. In fact, it's the only measure of any real value. Now remember, categorical data is data such as colour of eyes. So you can find maybe 5 people in the class had blue eyes and 3 people had brown. So you maybe be able to find the most frequent score. In that case, it might be blue eyes. So let's have a look at some of the answers that we've got for the questions that you'll come across. Now in this one, it just has a quick look at review. It says find the mode of the score. And if we have a look at these ones, you'll find that in number 1, the mode is 16. So I'll just have a look at those ones there. So in number 1, the mode is 16. In number 2, look, there's no mode at all because no number occurs more than another, so there's no mode. And in number 3, you'll notice that the mode is at the end of the data, 26. So the question is, discuss the relative merits of the mode in each of these cases. Now this takes a little bit of thinking, because you've got to work out, why is it? Is there any difference? The numbers are different. One is located at the middle, one is located at the end, one doesn't exist at all, there's no mode. So what sort of comments can we make about this? Well, let's have a look at number 1. First of all, the number 16 occurs the most often. So we can write that down. 16 occurs the most often. So that's just your fact. So start with your fact and notice that it's central because it's towards the middle. So you're just looking at it, you're stating the facts. As you can see, this one isn't so central, but this one is. It's central, and we can say it is typical. It is typical of this set of scores. Now, by that, typical of this set of scores, by that we mean we would expect it. We would expect that to be around the middle because that's what happens. Middle scores, mode, that's where it would be. Let's have a look at number 2. There's no mode here. So what we're saying is that no score occurs more often than another. More often than another. Now, notice the question was here to discuss. And so we start by looking at what we observe. No score occurs more often than another. That's the first thing. So we could say the mode is obviously, because you can see it, is obviously not a satisfactory measure of central tendency here. Of central tendency for these scores. So there's a conclusion that we've had to come to, because the scores itself, there's no mode, so we can't use it as a guide to the middleness, if you like, or the central tendency of the scores. What about this last one? Now you'll notice that it does have a mode, so we can say there is a mode. That's the first thing. But it occurs at one end of the set. So we can say it occurs at one end of the set of data, that is, of the set. So really, it is not a central value. So even though it does give us information about it, it doesn't really tell us about the middleness of the score. It really tells us that this is more of a biased score with more people at the end rather than at the middle. So there's a few situations. Number one, good central tendency measure, mode. Mode in number two, there's no mode, so it doesn't tell us anything about it. And here, because it's at the end, it's not actually telling us about central value, but it is telling us a little bit about that particular group of data. So that's the first thing. Now, there's a little note you'll have a look at the bottom of your page. So I'll pull this up a bit. There it is. It says, and I think there's a couple of important things to notice here, so I'll highlight what they are. It says, note that there are cases when the mode is important even if it is not a central value. So you can still use the mode to tell you something. For example, it says here, if the numbers are the sizes of hats sold by a shop, then the size which is sold most would be important to the shop owner and the manufacturer of hats. They're not really looking so much at the measure of central tendency, they're using it to decide which hats they should produce in order to get the best profit. So you can use the mode for very important things, but it doesn't always tell you the measure of central tendency. All right, let's have a look at a couple of other examples here. We're going to look here now at the mean and see what we can talk about regarding the mean. Now, I've already gone ahead and worked out the value of these. You could do it quickly on your calculator, I'm sure. But let's have a look at the first one. The question says find the mean of the scores. And this mean is 6.2. You can check this yourselves and make sure it's right. This one here, now notice 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 5, 6, 7, 80. You'll notice that the 80 replaces the 8 in this set, and you end with a mean that is equal to 20.6. Now that's a very interesting thing. One change, but a radical change, a big change, means that the actual means have actually changed quite a lot. So let's talk about what this means and what happens because of this. Well, let's write this down. In number one, the mean is central, which means it's typical. So it's central and typical. of the data. So we would expect it. It looks like what we would expect. 6.2 is a good representation of it. So we could say it is a good measure of central tendency. All right, what about number 2? Well, in number 2, let's summarise what we've got here. First of all, 4 out of 5 of the scores, 4 out of 5 of the scores are less than the mean. Are less than the mean. So the mean is 20.6 and 4 of those scores are less than it. So we can say it is not a central value. It is not a central value. It is not typical. It's not what we would expect. Does it mean that it's bad information? Well, actually it doesn't. It really does mean something different. Let's have a look at the note underneath it, because that sort of tells you there's something odd that's happened with this set of scores. It says the mean has the disadvantage. Now this is a very important thing. The mean has a disadvantage of being affected by extremely large or small values. So this could be a situation that's unexpected. A score of 80 would influence the mean, and look what it's done. It's dragged the average right up, but it doesn't really represent the middleness of the scores, because most of the scores are around about 5, 6 or 7. Now these have got a name. They're called outliers. Now sometimes it is useful, it says, to ignore the outliers when calculating the mean. And they've actually done it. Let's say that we cross off that 80. If we work that out, then the mean drops down, as you can see here. So there's a really good reason why sometimes you need to drop the outliers off when calculating the mean, and at other times it's there just for a good bit of information. And what about the median? Let's have a look at the median. The median should be able to tell us also about the middleness of scores. So let's see what we can learn from the median. Now these are already set up for us in a nice order. So we can see straight away that if we take 1, 2, 3, 4 and cross those off, and 1, 2, 3, 4, cross those off, there's our median value. So the median is equal to the average 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, in this case it's not the average. We don't have to worry about the average. It's just 6. There's no averages at all. So that's pretty good. Now it says discuss the relative merits of the median for this set of data. Well, first of all, the median itself also happens at the end of the score. Notice that the number 6 also occurs at the end there. So what we've got here is that the median is not really a good measure of central tendency here. Not really a good measure of central tendency. And I guess we need to say why, so you're clear on why. And that's because the median scores go right to the end. The median scores to be at one end of the scores. So it's not really giving a great indication of middleness. It might be even better here to average 3 and 6, even though it's not the middle score. That would be maybe a better indication of middleness, but certainly not just taking all the end scores and saying that's a measure of middleness, because it's not. So in conclusion, let's have a look at some of the things that are written in your book about mode and the mean and the median, and see if we can just draw a few quick conclusions. Mean, first of all, it's the most commonly used one. It's easy to understand, it's easy to calculate. But the value depends on every score in the data. And so, typical scores like outliers, outliers can influence it. What about mode? It's the most typical value within a set of scores because it's the one that occurs most often. It's easy to work out. It's not affected by outliers, but there may be no mode, or there may be more than one node. So it may not be a central value, whereas mean will be, although it is influenced by outliers. What about median? Now you'll need to take some time to go through this and remember it, but once you've had a look at it, you'll understand it and try it out with a few practices. But let's look at median. Easy to understand, yes. Now it says there are equal number of scores above it and below it, so that should indicate middleness. It's not affected by outliers because you cut them off to get to the middle, but sometimes there are unusual patterns. For example, this one where the median is also right through to the end, so sometimes it doesn't give us a measure of centralness. So understanding mean, mode and median is really helpful when we're interpreting data. Very significant that these factors be considered and remembered.